She offered coffee to the gentleman with the dog directly before the inspecting official. Her supervisor's voice remained level. He didn't appear enraged, merely frigid. "Finished. Your time here is over, Clara." 6 years of dedication dissolved in one utterance. Tears did not fall. She simply unfastened her apron, hands trembling, and departed. Not for contravening a regulation, but for championing a former service member and his assistance animal. What Clara was unaware of was that the entire incident had been recorded. And before the cafe's morning rush concluded, the ground began to vibrate. 4 military armored vehicles rolled into the parking area. From one stepped a Marine colonel in full ceremonial attire, a man who once owed his existence to the very veterans she had defended. And in that moment, everything transformed. Clara Albright wasn't the sort of woman people initially noticed, but she was the one they remembered longest. At 35, she managed the Hearthstone Brew, nestled on the edge of downtown Maplewood, Georgia, merely a 15-minute drive from Fort Haven, one of the largest marine installations in the southeastern region. The town itself resembled a scene from an idyllic painting. Oak-lined sidewalks, American flags on every third porch, and a hardware store that hadn't altered its paint color since the previous century. Yet inside the cafe, the atmosphere felt distinct, warmer, more human. Clara ensured that. She didn't operate the establishment like a typical business. She ran it like a secondary home, the kind of spot where someone could enter after a demanding day or a lengthy deployment and feel whole again. The coffee wasn't elaborate, no espresso martinis or intricate foam designs, just robust brews, hot refills, and handwritten notes affixed to the bulletin board behind the counter. But what distinguished the Hearthstone Brew wasn't its coffee. It was Clara. She recalled names, birth dates, and blackout periods for deployments. She knew who preferred their eggs thoroughly cooked and who hadn't consumed coffee since returning from overseas. She cultivated an environment for quietude, especially the kind emanating from veterans who bore more than just visible wounds. And every Wednesday at 9 a.m. precisely, she hosted what had subtly become a town custom, Heroes Gathering. It commenced with just 3 individuals. Her father-in-law, Arthur Albright, a retired Marine Corps drill instructor. Walter, a Vietnam veteran who seldom spoke but never missed a week. And Eleanor, a former Army nurse whose laughter resonated like wind chimes. Over time, the group expanded. Desert Storm, Iraq, Afghanistan. Veterans from every period found their way to her cafe, drawn less by the menu and more by the woman who managed it. Clara would always utter the same words before beginning. "This is a place to be acknowledged, not remedied. To rest, not perform." And they'd nod, shoulders relaxing as they sipped coffee and exchanged narratives, some humorous, some profound, and some too agonizing to articulate. She rarely spoke much about her own past, but everyone in town knew the general outline. Her husband, Sergeant Leo Albright, was killed in action 6 years prior in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. His photograph adorned the wall above the register, not in uniform, but in jeans and a flannel, holding a mug of coffee outside the cafe's front entrance. It was captured 2 weeks before his final deployment. He never returned. Clara never remarried, never even hinted at it. She'd channeled her sorrow into the cafe, not to escape it, but to construct something from it, something significant. People cherished her for it, But more than that, they revered her. Veterans addressed her as ma'am, without sarcasm. Teenagers held the door for her without prompting. Even the mayor visited once a month, simply to commend her for sustaining the town better than most institutions. But for Clara, it was never about recognition. It was about the objective, the subtle one, the one that didn't come with medals, but mattered just as profoundly. Every time she poured a cup of coffee for a veteran too anxious to sit in a crowded room. Every time she emerged from behind the counter to ascertain if someone was all right after gazing too long out the window. Every time she permitted a dog to curl up under a table without inquiry. It wasn't a rule book she adhered to. It was intuition. It was affection. And that Wednesday morning, the one where everything shifted, commenced like all the others. The bell above the door chimed softly. The regulars filed in. Coffee brewed. The cafe filled with hushed conversation, laughter, and the comforting hum of belonging. Clara didn't yet know it, but by day's end, that small corner cafe would become the epicenter of a tempest that would reverberate all the way to the capital. And it would all commence with a man, a dog, and a woman who refused to yield. It was a crisp Wednesday morning, the kind where sunlight appeared cooler than it felt, and steam rose gently from every cup like ethereal wisps. Clara was behind the counter, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back, greeting every familiar face with that same nod, quiet but cordial. She had already brewed the initial pot of dark roast for Hero's gathering and was arranging the stack of ceramic mugs she reserved exclusively for the veterans. Then the door reopened, and Silas Croft entered with Spirit by his side. Silas was one of the newer patrons, late 50s, ex-Marine Corps reconnaissance. He spoke little and never lingered, but he came. That signified something. Spirit, his black Labrador German Shepherd mix, was never more than a few inches from his heel. The dog wore a bright red vest with bold white lettering. Service dog. Do not pet. Clara offered Silas a small wave. Table by the windows is available, she said, smiling. He nodded, murmured a thanks, and guided Spirit to the far corner. Then the atmosphere changed. The front door swung open with a brisk whoosh, and in strode a man in a navy blazer, neatly pressed trousers, and an expression that seemed averse to happiness. He carried a clipboard as if it were a mark of distinction. His name tag read, Victor Sterling, State Health Inspector. Clara hadn't anticipated a visit. She greeted him courteously. "May I assist you?" she inquired. "An inspection," he stated flatly. Unannounced. He navigated the space with clinical detachment, tapping on metal surfaces, verifying labels, pulling open refrigerator doors. And then he spotted the dog. He froze mid-stride as if he'd collided with a barrier. "That animal," he declared loudly, pointing toward Spirit, "is in violation of state health code. No animals permitted where food is served." Heads turned. Conversations quieted. Clara stepped out from behind the counter, careful not to elevate her voice. "He's a registered service dog," she said calmly. "Federal law permits his presence here." Sterling frowned, surveying the room as if seeking reinforcement. "I don't care what vest he's wearing," he snapped. "Animals carry dander, saliva, hair. This is a food hazard. Unless you want this cafe shut down, that dog goes." Silas stiffened in his chair, his hand gripping the coffee cup as if it might shatter. Spirit didn't move. He simply looked up at Silas and waited. The room fell silent. Clara took a slow breath and uttered the words she knew she couldn't retract. "I won't ask a veteran to leave, and I won't ask his service dog to leave either. You're welcome to write your report, but you'll do it knowing you attempted to humiliate a man who served this country in front of the very people he served to protect." Sterling's jaw clenched. From across the cafe, someone muttered, "Absolutely right." But it didn't matter, because standing in the doorway now was another figure, Brenda Vance, regional manager for the Hearthstone Brews parent company. Apparently, she'd arrived early for a routine check-in, just in time to witness everything. Her eyes were wide, her tone was glacial. "Clara Albright," she said, "you've just violated a direct health compliance policy in front of a state inspector. Pack your things. You're terminated." Gasps rang out. A spoon clattered to the floor. Silas stood halfway, shocked. Clara didn't move, not at first. Then she looked around the cafe. She looked at Silas, at Spirit, at the small chalkboard on the wall that said, "Heroes gathering today. Free coffee for vets." And she smiled, just barely. She untied her apron with trembling fingers, folded it, and placed it on the counter. Then she turned to Maya, the young barista by the espresso machine, and whispered, "Make sure Silas gets his refill." She walked out the side door into the morning sunlight as the cafe stood frozen behind her. No one followed, but someone pressed record, and somewhere out in the ether of phones and social media and invisible networks, a story had just been captured. A quiet act of defiance, a boundary drawn. A woman dismissed not because she violated a rule, but because she refused to compromise her principles. And far away in an office filled with military photos and brass nameplates, Colonel Elias Thorne received a phone call he wouldn't disregard. For 35 minutes, the Hearthstone Brew was silent. Customers whispered. Some left their coffee half drunk. Others sat still, glancing out the window as if the wind itself might carry in an explanation. But Maya, the young barista Clara had trained, remained at her post. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured Silas's second cup. "I didn't know what to say," she would later admit, "but I knew if I left that station, I'd be letting her down." Silas sat quietly at his table. He hadn't touched his cup since Clara left. Spirit lay curled at his feet, ears twitching, but still, as if he sensed that something had fractured in the room. And then it began. A low rumble, barely audible at first, like distant thunder rolling across Maplewood Hills. Chairs wobbled. Coffee rippled. The cafe's windows began to hum. Customers stood and looked out. From the east end of Main Street, through the morning mist and maple-lined sidewalks, came 4 military-armored vehicles, tires growling against pavement. Their lights cut through the haze like search beams. The vehicles pulled into the lot in a slow, deliberate line, blocking the cafe's front. Doors opened in unison, and out stepped Colonel Elias Thorne, decorated, composed, in full Marine Corps dress blues, gold buttons, polished white gloves in hand, his ribbons numerous, his expression impenetrable. Behind him, 24 Marines followed in formation, their uniforms sharp, their presence unmistakable. They stood at attention on the sidewalk outside the cafe. Inside, no one moved. The inspector, Victor Sterling, stood frozen near the pastry case, his clipboard lowered, forgotten. Brenda Vance, the regional manager, had paled 2 shades and stepped back from the counter as if it might scorch her. The cafe's bell jingled once, and Colonel Thorne entered alone. His boots struck the floor hard, slow, echoing like a drum roll through the silence. He stopped in the center of the cafe, glancing once at Maya, who swallowed hard, then at Silas, who had slowly stood up. Their eyes met. Silas nodded quietly. The colonel returned it with something even deeper, a salute. And that's when Sterling stammered, I didn't know he was—" The colonel didn't raise his voice. You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic dignity. He turned to Maya. Is Clara Albright here? Maya shook her head. She was fired for standing up for Mr. Croft and Spirit. Colonel Thorne turned, his jaw tightening. That woman once served the families of this base better than most agencies combined. She gave my men a place to breathe when they came home with no words, and she treated a decorated Marine with the respect this nation promised him and forgot. Silas cleared his throat, speaking for the first time. She didn't ask questions, he said quietly. She didn't flinch when I walked in with a dog. She just poured the coffee and gave me a place to sit. That was the first time in a long time I felt like a person again. A tear slipped down a woman's cheek near the register. Colonel Thorne nodded, then turned to the Marines waiting outside. He stepped toward the door, and with a simple motion, he raised his hand in signal. They filed in, orderly, silent, reverent. 2 Marines moved behind the counter and removed the corporate logo from the wall, folding the vinyl panel like a flag. Another replaced the chalkboard sign with a new one brought from their vehicle. It read in bold white hand-painted letters, "Welcome to Clara's Haven, where honor is served daily." When Brenda Vance tried to interject, Colonel Thorne looked at her only once. You've made your decision, he said. Now we'll make ours. Then he stepped outside, phone in hand. A moment later, Maya's phone buzzed. She looked down, confused. It's a direct message from Fort Haven, she said. They've requested Clara report to base headquarters. Today. Silas let out a slow breath, eyes wide. Spirit stood, and in the cafe that once held coffee and comfort, something entirely new was brewing. A reckoning. Clara sat in her truck on the edge of her driveway, keys in hand, but engine off. She'd been sitting there for 15 minutes. Still in her cafe attire, coffee-stained jeans, her favorite blue flannel, and shoes that had seen more spilled espresso than she cared to enumerate. Clara stared out at the road, replaying the morning repeatedly. Fired in front of customers for doing the honorable thing, and now a message from the base. Colonel Thorne would like to meet at Fort Haven headquarters today. She didn't know what that implied. She didn't know if it was a positive development, but somehow, deep down, she sensed the shift. Something grander than her life at the Hearthstone Brew had just begun. Clara took a breath, turned the ignition, and headed down the familiar road she'd traversed hundreds of times before. Only this time, she wasn't going to deliver muffins or coffee canisters. This time, she was passing through the gates. Fort Haven stood like a city of disciplined, orderly roads, flag-lined avenues, the sound of cadence calls echoing in the background. Clara had been there as a military spouse previously, but now, walking into the main administration building, she felt like an outsider once more. Colonel Elias Thorne met her at the door. He wasn't in dress blues now, just a clean khaki uniform and a calm presence that could command a room with a mere glance. "Clara," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." She shook it, firm but uncertain. "Still not entirely sure why I'm here." "Let me show you something." He led her down a hallway lined with portraits of past commanders, training maps, and commendation plaques. They stopped in front of a door labeled Veteran Transition and Wellness Initiative. Inside, the room was filled with folding chairs, whiteboards, and boxes of unused supplies. A few young staffers moved quietly in the corner, setting up therapy mats and relocating donated equipment. "This is a pilot program," he explained. "We've been trying to get it off the ground for 2 years. The trouble is, it's hard to find someone who understands vets, not just from paperwork, but from the inside." Clara folded her arms. "I'm not a therapist. I don't have a degree in social work." "No," he said, "but you built a place where men and women with invisible wounds came to heal. You did more with coffee and kindness than some programs do with $1 million budget." She didn't answer right away. Colonel Thorne stepped closer, his tone softening. "You created a sanctuary without realizing it. What you did in that cafe, that was leadership. That was service." Then from the back room, a voice called out, "Is that her?" A young woman stepped out, mid-20s, long sleeves covering burn scars along her arms and jaw. Her name tag read Chloe Davis. She walked slowly, a golden retriever puppy beside her, wearing a red vest marked "In Training." "Hi," she said shyly. "I just wanted to say I saw the video of you and the dog and the guy. I haven't been to a coffee shop since I came home, but I think I could sit in a place you run." Clara blinked. The air in her chest shifted. Colonel Thorne smiled. "We'd like to offer you a position, not as a figurehead, not as a name on a brochure, but as the director of this center." Clara exhaled. "You're serious as a heart attack," he said. "You'd run the programs, build the space, shape the culture. You already know what works: community, routine, respect." She looked at Chloe, now kneeling with her dog. She thought of Silas, of Spirit, of the dozens of men and women who'd found their way into the Hearthstone brew, not for lattes, but for peace. And suddenly she knew. "I'll do it," she said quietly. The colonel nodded once. "Then let's get to work." That night, Clara stood alone in what would soon be the new heart of Fort Haven's outreach efforts. The walls were bare, the floors still scuffed, but the air felt full of something sacred. She reached into her bag and took out an old photo. Leo, her husband, sitting outside the cafe, his boots up, smiling at her. She pinned it to the wall. No plaque, no frame, just memory and mission. Word spread faster than she imagined. By the end of the week, the Veteran Transition and Wellness Center at Fort Haven wasn't just another military initiative. It had become something alive. Veterans who hadn't stepped foot on base in years showed up. Young soldiers returned with hesitant spouses. Even the local newspaper, the Maplewood Gazette, ran a full-page spread. From cafe to command, how Clara Albright is rebuilding trust, one cup at a time. Clara didn't do anything flashy. She didn't bring in elaborate speakers or consultants. She just did what she'd always done. She paid attention. She asked names and remembered them. She posted a whiteboard near the coffee pot that read, "Who needs a ride? Who needs a listener?" She let dogs curl up in corners of therapy rooms without a fuss. She kept that same handwritten notebook from the cafe and added new pages, one for every veteran who walked through the door. Some days were quiet, some were hard, some were full of nothing but silence and refills. But something powerful was building, a space where pain wasn't hidden and healing didn't need to be loud. Silas came often now. Spirit would walk straight to his favorite corner and lie down like he'd always belonged. Chloe Davis showed up every Tuesday. She wasn't ready to speak in groups yet, but she'd begun sketching again. Images of dogs, hands, and homecomings. And Maya, the young barista from the Hearthstone Brew, visited every Friday. She brought coffee, yes, but also laughter. And when Clara needed a second opinion on anything from wallpaper to website wording, Maya was the first to weigh in. But not everyone was thrilled. Some officials questioned why someone with no formal training was running a federal pilot program. Auditors arrived quietly, clipboards in hand, suits stiff with skepticism. They examined logs, asked probing questions, even tested the water filters on the coffee machine. At the end of their review, one inspector looked Clara dead in the eye and asked, "What certifications do you hold that qualify you to counsel veterans?" Clara didn't blink. "I don't have certifications," she said softly. "Just consistency and kindness." The inspector didn't respond, but he took notes. A week later, Clara received a formal notice. The wellness center was being reviewed for possible national model expansion. Colonel Thorne called it a victory. Clara just called it humbling. But even as the center grew, the Hearthstone Brew still tugged at her heart. One afternoon, she returned quietly, without announcement. Maya was behind the counter. "You're supposed to be famous now," she teased, sliding a mug across the counter. "I'm just here for coffee," Clara said, smiling. The cafe had changed. Photos of veterans now lined the walls. Silas, Chloe, and others. A new sign had been hung near the register. Clara's Corner, where no one sits alone. Later that day, Clara drove across town to speak at a local fundraiser for veteran families. It was a modest event, mostly older folks and kids with crayon posters. She spoke without notes. "I didn't set out to build a program," she said. "I just refused to throw out a man and his dog." The crowd fell silent, then applause. Loud, long, real. And somewhere in the back, Silas stood, his silver star pinned to his chest, and gave her a quiet salute. Back at the center that night, Clara sat alone by the wall of photos. She added one more, a picture of the conference crowd giving her a standing ovation. Beside it, she taped the old cafe photo, the one with Leo and the soldier from long ago. And below them, she wrote a simple line: "Honor grows where kindness is consistent." As she turned to leave, a young veteran with nervous eyes stepped through the door. "Is this the place for, people like us?" Clara smiled gently. "No, son. This is the place for people like all of us." And just like that, her circle wasn't just full, it was open. In a world that moves faster every day, it's easy to overlook the quiet moments. The soft-spoken cafe manager, the trembling veteran, the wag of an assistance dog's tail. But sometimes, those moments are the ones that shape us. Clara Albright didn't wear a uniform. She didn't hold rank, but she upheld something sacred: dignity. And in doing so, she reminded us all that honor isn't earned once. It's defended daily. What happened at that small cafe in Maplewood, Georgia, may seem like a rare story, but perhaps it shouldn't be. How many Claras have we walked past without noticing? How many veterans have we thanked only with words, not actions? In today's divided world, Clara's story asks us to pause, to ask ourselves, would I have stood up like she did? Have I ever kept quiet when I should have spoken up? We want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a quiet act of courage in your own life? Or maybe you've been on the receiving end of someone else's grace. Share your story in the comments below. Your experience could inspire someone else to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Thank you for spending time with us today. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in quiet heroes. At this channel, we tell stories that matter, stories that honor not just the uniform, but the humanity behind it. Because sometimes the strongest stand doesn't come with a salute.